Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. It is such a pleasure to be here in this beautiful store and doing this event with Emma, whose book I loved so much. And thank you, Jamie, for doing this with us. So we are each going to start with very brief readings at the beginning here, and I am going to go first. So The Garden is really my pregnancy as a haunted house novel, and it is set in the late 1940s at an isolated country house turned hospital where a husband and wife doctor team is trying out an experimental new cure for repeated miscarriage. And our main character's name is Irene, and she is sort of the doctor's prickliest and most reluctant patient, but she's also pregnant and desperate to stay that way, which kind of traps her in the world of the book, really. And she, over the course of her time at this hospital, she's not the kind of person who follows rules very naturally, and so she's kind of wandering around and poking at things that she's not supposed to be poking at. And she discovers a walled garden that seems to have sort of mysterious magical powers. But I am going to read actually just the first couple of pages of the book, so kind of before any of that has happened. Chapter 1. The house held still, and behind it the garden rested, brown turning green. Doctor and Doctor, Mr. and Mrs. came out onto the steps to watch the approach. They did this when they could. Welcome made a difference. Without turning to him, she said, "Remember not to talk too much," as if he ever did, or could, or wanted to when she was there. George and Irene drove toward the house that held their future and saw the doctor and doctor standing at the top of the main stair right in the maw of the gaping door. That was the way things looked to Irene: the steps, the tongue, the portico, the brow, the facade, the wide marble face. George slowed the car just enough, Irene feared, to be noticed. "Jesus," he said, "what is this place? Why are they watching us like that?" "Speed up, they'll think we're afraid of them." "Irene, we are." Fear wasn't the feeling Irene had been aware of before this moment, but as the car neared and Irene kept an eye on the doctors, waiting for them to move, she understood that all along she'd been imagining a hospital, like the one where they'd met these doctors the first time. Instead, it seemed she had to face the mammoth, patient creature of this house, which was stationary, yes, but stationary like a living thing, holding still on purpose only until it could take her inside. Look, even its arms were extended, two long wings, angled in, ready to close. And she had to face these complimentary doctors, too, fixed as the statues that flank entries. If it were Irene standing there with the woman doctor, the match would be nearer. "You look alike a little, did you notice?" George had said to her after their first appointment. Irene had noticed only that feeling of hard-to-place familiarity that makes a person ask, "Do I know you from somewhere?" The doctor's eyes weighed, and Irene wondered how clearly they could see her and George through the windshield, and if the doctors could read lips. "You're really going to leave me here?" she said to George, trying not to move her mouth much. She meant it to sound playful, but to be here, they had both pedaled themselves. George's forehead gathered. "No, it's all right," Irene said. They were close enough now to see smiles rising to the doctors' faces. George stopped the car and came around to Irene's door with the rollicking gait she loved. She put her hand in his so he could help her out. Every time he stewarded her lately, he seemed to be rubbing her face in his stupid hope when she had enough of her own. She climbed forth. She touched the slippery rose-colored fabric of her new maternity suit. This was the color she'd wanted right away from the catalog's many choices, warm and bloomy. "Good morning," the woman doctor called and descended the stairs to press George and Irene's joined hands. George broke his grip then to reach up the stairs and greet the man doctor, still a few steps up, as if sealing some bargain. "How was the drive?" asked the woman doctor. "I tried to take the corners slow for her stomach," said George. "What a good sign," the woman doctor said. Irene peered into her face. Not a perfect mirror, no. Something similar about their chins and the hard set of their mouths, the lift of their eyebrows, but this woman's eyes were blue where Irene's were wheat-colored, and Irene's hair was darker. And, of course, the doctor was older, too. How old? Older than Irene's own age, 28, but much younger, she thought, than her mother. In that middle territory, what happened to a childless woman? Irene had begun finding out for herself. Kitchens and bedrooms and living rooms full of screaming quiet. Sun on carpets, rain on doorsteps, quiet so loud she could hear nothing else. But she wondered if for this woman doctor, it might be different. "Very promising," said the man doctor. He had charm, but there wasn't much to wonder about him. The doctors led the Willards up. Stairs brought out the sluggish drag of the weight at Irene's center, and even here she didn't like this awareness, which had never led anywhere good before. Her body had over and over proven itself a liar. She'd started to suspect this might just be a new uncovering of a trait it had always had. As they fed themselves in, one by one, Irene had time to notice that up close the marble of the house was in fact veined, like skin. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Claire, and what a delight to be reading with you. Thank you, Jamie Beth. I know my voice sounds a little whacked. That's what lots of lovely book events will do. Thank you to the Midtown Scholar and all the bookstores that have hosted so far. So my name is Emma Copley Eisenberg. I am going to read to you a little bit from Housemates. I guess all you need to know is that there are two young queer people named Bernie and Leah who move in together in a group house in Philadelphia. And they embark on a road trip across Pennsylvania. They do actually come through Harrisburg, fun facts. And the reason for the road trip is that Bernie, who is a photographer's professor, has died and left them his photographic estate. So they're trying to go and pick it up. And he lives sort of near a fictionalized, let's see, what landmark can I give you all? Sort of near the Michaud State Forest. So. At this point in the book, they're in Lancaster, familiar to some. Bernie rolled down Leah's window. The young Amish boy was going to Lancaster, he said, which was on their way, and added no time. Leah could see this plainly for herself on the map on her phone. Are you guys making a movie? The Amish boy asked when he was settled into the seat behind Bernie. So they pick up a little hitchhiker. No, Bernie said. Why? Because of that, the boy said. He pointed to Bernie's tripod and big camera bag, which sat on the seat and in the footwell behind Leah. We get a lot of people coming through to make movies about us. We were just talking about this, Bernie said. I was saying that your community, the Amish, does not like that. Yes and no, the boy said. There was a man on my street who spoke to a guy from Europe who came here to make a movie about the Amish last year, and they shunned him for months and made him sit separately in church. But that was because he showed his face and spoke directly to the camera, so there was no way to deny it. Also, he told the camera secrets people were keeping. But there are many ways to do it and deny it. If you don't show your face, for example, or if you turn your face away, but nonetheless give the camera your best angles, like my friend Polly, when she got on the cover of a magazine last year on vacation in Florida. She got a husband out of that and everything, and even briefly appeared on Ellen, sitting behind a screen, of course. Leah looked over at Bernie, but Bernie had one eye on the two-lane road in front of her and one on the boy behind her. What do you think makes people so interested in you? Bernie asked. Oh, plenty, said the boy. It's Saturday, so people did their errands, and now they're heading to the smorgasbord. You can eat and smoke and hang out there. That's where I'm going, if you would be so kind. Certainly, Bernie said, but you're allowed to smoke? Well, you say you're going to the bathroom, but instead, you go through the parking lot and stand behind the pillars. Oh, and there's a kid who stands at the back entrance to the smorgasbord selling black t-shirts from packs he buys at Walmart. You buy one, put it over your clothes so it absorbs the smell, do your stuff, toss the shirt in the trash. On your way out, no one the wiser. Leah was interested now, despite herself. She felt her riled up annoyance meter ease down from a 9 to a 6. What else happens there? Leah asked. Well, you eat there, obviously, the boy said. And I have a girlfriend who works there in the kitchen. She's English, like you all, so I go to see her. I don't take part in the other shenanigans anymore, the action that other boys will do behind the pillars, but not me. My heart belongs to Alicia. How old are you? Leah asked. 13, but I'll be 14 in August. Will you go on Rumspringa soon? That's not really a thing, said the boy. We don't get Rumspringa. Everything counts. There's no time off. You just decide. And what will you decide? Oh, to stay, obviously. Why? My parents are pretty cool. They don't care if I go to the smorgasbord, for example, or they wouldn't if they knew. I just tell them I'm going to town to do the shopping, and they get it. They think I walk, though. That is the only lie I tell. Sometimes my sister and her husband will take me in their buggy to Lancaster, but today my sister is sick. She's having another kid, even though she doesn't want to. So she's not feeling well. But anyway, one time she and her husband took me to the small mall near Lancaster. We'll pass it here in a moment. And I got to talking to this kid about my age. English, who was there for sneakers too, but by himself. He couldn't decide which sneakers to get. He had a black sneaker in one hand and a white sneaker in the other hand, and he had no one to ask which one to buy, so he asked me. I said the black one, and my sister came over then and said, "Hi, and who is your friend?" And he said his name and asked her which sneaker she liked better, and she said the black one too, just like I said. And she smiled at me and touched the top of my head, like she does when she loves me. And it kind of hit me then how lonely it would be out there without a family. His mom had just given him money and said, "Go." Leah turned to look at the boy. He wasn't wearing his seatbelt, and one of his shirt tails had come untucked from his pants. "Is everyone white?" Leah asked. "White top? No, white like race. Do you have to be white to be in your community?" "Yeah, pretty much," the boy said. "Alicia is black, though." "Is that rare? Interracial dating, even being friends?" "Oh, no, not really. We wouldn't talk about it at church, or I guess with my grandparents, but everywhere else." "Why not?" "My grandparents live in a different world, a different Pennsylvania from me, from my parents even." "What world do your parents live in?" The boy thought for a minute. "Actually, there's like 3 worlds," he said at last. "The one that's in the books about the Amish people, that makes people want to make movies about us, that's the one my grandparents live in. Then there's the one that is our actual lives now, where me and my sister and her husband live. And then there is the one that is out there, where all of you live." "Which 2 are closer together?" Bernie asked then. "Your life and your grandparents' lives, or your life and our lives?" It was a good question, and Leah wished she had been the one to ask it. She waited for the boy's answer. "I don't know," the boy said. "Maybe they are the same distance apart." The boy gave directions and rolled down his window at the turn off the divided highway. The smorgasbord turned out to be a whole complex of many stores. Grocery store, feed store, holy bookstore, all linked by parking lots. "Well, thanks a lot," the boy said when he was out of the car and standing by Bernie's open window, the red awninged entrance behind him. "Hey," he said, "you want to take my picture with the big camera?" "That's okay," Bernie said. "We're on our way somewhere else." "Oh, come on," the boy said. "I'd like it if you did. I'll turn away so I can deny it. But no one ever has before." Bernie rubbed her eyes with the tips of her fingers, and Leah watched the way the skin under her eyes stretched and purpled with the movements of her hands. "Okay," Bernie said, "why not?"
I love that part.
A little Pennsylvania content, why not?
Love it. Am I on? I'm on. So thank you all for being here. Thank you to the Midtown Scholar for hosting this, and thank you to Alex for asking me. This is like a dream come true for me, so I hope it is a dream come true for all of you as well. When I told a friend that I would be talking to the 2 of you, and she said, "What are they doing on stage together? Those books have nothing to do with each other." And I said, "Well, maybe we're going to see what we can do." So I wanted to start with houses and locations as characters. I think, Claire, in your book, there is a lot of talk of the house as a character. And Emma, in yours, it's not so much, because not so much happens in the house as opposed to the road trip. But there are a couple of key lines in there about the house with the blood not flowing right. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious to have you 2 talk to each other about houses.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that spaces shape the people in them, right? And they shape the way that the people in them relate to each other. And so I knew pretty quickly, once I had taken this seed of this real historical treatment that I was then going to depart from the reality of in my own imagined way, I knew I wanted to get everybody isolated somewhere where they would really have to deal with only each other. And this is something I seem to do in my fiction a lot. I am very interested in sort of like spaces that can be kind of self-contained worlds, and that can be like little pressure cookers, right? Where I can kind of like limit the variables and bounce everybody off each other and see what happens. Because I think some really weird things can happen when the outside world is not coming in to sort of like pop the balloon. And so I think that the house in my novel also really comes to be, it's kind of like the footprint of the patriarchy too, in lots of ways, because there's this like very menacing grandfather figure who's kind of shaped the woman doctor into who she is, and the house is kind of like the shape that he's left behind. And I think relationships form within that house in your novel in a very different way than they might somewhere else too. I mean, there's so many, they're very important walls. Yes. and porousnesses, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. I love that you asked that, Jamie Beth, because like I think, yes, as I was reading Claire's book, I was like, wow, this really is a Housemates book as well.
Yeah.
Like I'm really interested in relationships between adults who are living in close proximity to each other, who are not lovers, who are not family members, who aren't even really friends. Like I think that describes both of our books. I think those spaces are so fascinating and quite underwritten and underseen in fiction. So I knew I wanted to write. My book also has historical inspiration inspired by the photographer Bernice Abbott, and her life partner Elizabeth McCausland was a critic who very few people have heard of. And I was like, okay, like I want to think about why these two artists are attracted to each other. They want to go on this road trip. What are they leaving? And so I had to think about where they began. And where they began was like this very intimate group house where people are living in great proximity. Yes, on the other side of walls. You're hearing people cry late at night. You're hearing them brush their teeth. You're seeing their toothpaste splatters on the sink, and yet you don't really know anything about them or where they're from. I think those are really interesting and like loaded relationships. Yeah, and I think the house in my book it becomes like this site of great imagination. Like they're trying to sort of build a queer utopia in a way, and they're kind of failing, but they're also
They're trying so hard.
They're trying so hard. Yeah, I know. And in a way, the characters are sort of reacting against that. We were joking that like I think all of our characters are not very good at joining. Right. Actually, they need to leave groups. But so in order to leave a group, you first need to establish the group. Like
that's true.
Thinking of like that beautiful Mary McCarthy novel, like you need to understand what the culture is from which the characters are running, and that felt important. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So Claire, you currently live in Pittsburgh, but are not from there.
Right.
You're more from like New England, where your book is set.
Right.
And Emma, you are from New York City, but live in Philadelphia, and here we are in Pennsylvania.
True.
So can you talk a little bit about any research you did, how you did it? Was it book-based? Was it experiential? Was it getting in the car and driving? And so how, you talked about how place shapes somebody, and that's a house or a city or a state. How did you embody those spaces and why?
Ooh, yes, I did a lot of, I would say, experiential research. My first book is nonfiction, and I'm very sort of like passionate about breaking down some of the barriers between genres. Like most, amazing books are just well-told stories. The words that we call them on the back and the section that we shelve them in the bookstore are important, but also many of the skills are the same. So I was definitely drawing on those research skills from my first book. I did a lot of driving around Pennsylvania for this novel. So they basically do a big loop around the state of Pennsylvania for in the imagined road trip. And I had a lot of maps up on the wall, and I would look at the map, and then I would decide where I was going to go. So I did, I would say like between 5 and 7 driving trips around the state. Cool. Everywhere that they go in the book, I've been with my feet, which feels important. But also, the first and third parts of the book are set in West Philadelphia, where I live. And so that was just kind of like rendering what I think is like juicy and delicious and strange about the neighborhood where I live. But I did shadow a large format photographer for this book. So for anyone who's not a photo nerd, a large format camera is a beautiful, quite magnificent large camera that has a ground glass viewfinder that makes everything that you look through it upside down and backwards. It's also really unwieldy. It's really difficult to master. If you think of like Ansel Adams or like some of those big, beautiful landscape shots, those are all made with large format. So I found a large format photographer who works in my area, and I said, hey, like I love what you do. Can I buy a few hours of your time, like at your whatever rate you charge to teach students? And she was like, no, you cannot I will not, accept your money, but you can come and hang out with me. And I did. That's cool. I think the physicality of the art form is something I was really interested in too. So I wanted to get that right. And I'm a big believer in experiential research. But I know you did a ton because your book is based on an incredible like historical story. So
yeah, well, I was going to say, I could tell you had done that with the photography because like it just is so, like I felt like I could picture how it was done. And you also like just the importance of that kind of photography is so like I don't know, you just render it, I think, so well for that character, like why it's important to have it be upside down and backwards and so hard to do.
hard,
Yeah. So I think the experiential part of research for my novel was just having been pregnant 2 times and having 2 children,
very
and
important,
finding it like very weird. Like it's a very deeply weird. I mean, I think everyone has different experiences with it, but it is a very. I'm someone who really likes to control things, and this was such an embodied experience of a lack of control at the very core of myself, because there was a process happening inside me that mattered more to me than anything else that had ever happened to me, and yet I couldn't access it at all, even though it was like kneeing me in the rib half the time, you know? So it was a very, and since then, like that's just sort of an introduction to what parenting is forever, where it's like now there's this thing walking around outside of me that matters to me more than anything else, and I still can't control it or really even know what's going on with it at any given moment. And so I think that was like one of the seeds of the book, but the actual historical seed that you're talking about is this real drug called diethylstilbestrol that I had never heard of, and that I came across a reference to actually so for my previous novel, The Illness Lesson, I had a UK editor who did not like the title. She felt that illness was a downer, and that they had had a book about chronic fatigue syndrome, and it hadn't sold well. And I was like, well, this novel is not about chronic fatigue syndrome. But so I humored them by like poking around in very weird, dark corners of the medical internet for a little while, and I came across this reference to this drug, which is not of the right time period for The Illness Lesson, so it wasn't going to be relevant to that novel. But I just couldn't believe when I read the story of it that I had never heard of it. So it was a drug that was in real life pioneered by a husband and wife researcher team. The woman in real life was not a physician because her surgeon father didn't believe that women should be physicians, but she was a researcher who studied female hormones, basically. And her husband was an OBGYN. And they had discovered that around the time of miscarriage, hormones swing a lot. And so their thinking was that if they could just even that out, everything would be better. And so that caught me, because I think often when we start talking about evening women out, we're in kind of scary, ominous territory. And I also, it turned out that this drug, and the idea of this woman researcher as well, like being kind of the pioneer of this theory, I thought was so interesting. And then the drug became this like slow unfolding tragedy, really, where it did terrible things to the reproductive organs of the female babies born to the mothers who took it, which wasn't always evident until those children reached puberty. And it didn't do it to everyone. It was like a much greater risk of that, and also various kinds of gynecological cancers. And so it took everybody a while. The drug is sometimes called the silent thalidomide. So thalidomide is the one that was mostly prescribed in Europe for morning sickness that caused really obvious birth defects. And these were not as obvious for some period of time. But what caught me was that the drug was prescribed after they started to figure this out. It was prescribed from the early 40s through the early 70s in this country. And that question was so interesting to me, of like, why was it so hard to see, right? Like, was there a deliberate not knowing there? And so I think I was kind of writing into that. So the research that I did for that is sort of, practically speaking, was just a lot of like poking around online and then finding various books that kind of detailed the experience of people who had experienced exposure to DES. So, yeah.
Do you think being pregnant is like writing a novel?
So that's an interesting one. I mean, in some ways, it is much easier in that the process is happening without your conscious. I mean, the same things that made me crazy about it also make it easier, because you don't have to be involved, and in fact, you can't be involved, really. I mean, you are. It's like at your central core self, but you can't see what's going on in there, and you have no like real conscious, which feels very different to me than a novel. I'm not one of those novelists who's like, and then my characters arrived and spoke to me, and all I had to do was follow them around and write down their story. Like, that is not. It's usually like a great deal of work for me to, I mean, it's weird. I think there are subconscious layers of the brain that are involved that are a lot more like dreaming. But writing a book was a lot more conscious work.
Fair enough. I was just struck by I was like, that's an interesting metaphor for writing a novel, this idea of like something that is so central to you and also out of your conscious like.
And
control.
You are
yeah.
right, because there is a layer of novels that's like that too. I just think it's maybe less of it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That makes sense.
That's a great question.
Let's talk about magic.
Ooh.
So I am
we like magic.
Yes.
I am a very literal thinker and literal writer. I need to put my feet where I'm writing.
Sure.
I don't imagine spaces. I go to spaces. However, I enjoyed both of your books immensely, and there was some magic happening there. which are not books that I'm normally drawn to because I am such a literal thinker. So this was a real like mind-opening experience for me. I was also petrified the entire time I was reading your book. So
Yeah.
bravo if that's what you were going for. You
You're
did
welcome.
And Emma, the joy I felt on the road trip was just, again, like, I don't know how you do that. That was amazing. But there is magic in both of your books in very different ways. So would you like to, I don't want anyone to break any, no spoilers, but do you want to talk about your magic?
Well, magic is pretty centrally important to me almost always as a writer, and I didn't discover that until well after my MFA program. I spent my early efforts writing fiction trying to be a very good student of fiction. So I was trying to like very tightly control everything that happened, and as a result, I was writing these like flat as a pancake stories that had no life. And then the very first strange thing that I ever wrote was the title story of what became my story collection. And it really began as this experiment. Like I'd had this sort of like half dreaming, half waking idea as I was falling asleep one night about a teacher standing in front of a classroom, a 5th grade classroom, and shedding body parts. And what would that teach her students? And I was like, I wrote it down, I know. And I was like, I don't write stories like that. And then I was I think 3 years out of my MFA at that point, and I was like, well, why not write it? It sounds really fun to me to write this, and I don't have to show it to anyone. And so I think like reaching that place of like experimentation and play and not trying to control everything so much is probably the piece of novels that we were talking about before that is very crucial for me and it didn't come naturally to me for a long, long time. And magic is very connected to it for me. I think everyone finds that, somewhere. And for me, magic is play. And so I really love messing with the boundaries between the real and the surreal, and I love my fiction's happy place is like slipping between those all the time. I also think the longer I live, the weirder I find life to be. And the more just like really insistently surreal experiences I realize we have in the course of our lives. And so it doesn't feel that, I'm not someone who like actually believes in literal ghosts, but I think some piece of me does, and so that's the piece that ends up like taking the wheel for parts of my fiction writing.
I love that idea that like magic is play. Like that is a much more inclusive definition of magic that I can say I could put myself in that category because I, like you, Jamie, I grew up in a very evidence-based household, I would say. My dad was a lawyer, like Jews.
My dad's a lawyer too.
Yeah, like what is that? Yeah.
My dad's a criminal.
Yeah, yeah. It's on the other side. It's all part of the system.
It's all part of the system.
Knowledge-based, evidence-based. Like he would ask us, like, what evidence do you have in support of this conclusion all the time. That was a joke, but it's true. And so I think no tarot, no witchy things were tolerated in my household. So I think for me, it's been a big leap to even like open my mind to thinking about things that are sort of beyond the evidence-based. And similar to you, I think, George Saunders like wrote this amazing essay, right, where he was like in early grad school, he was like, I was just writing sad white man down by the sad river stories. Same.
Yes.
Hard same.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
But so Housemates has a narrator who is a first-person narrator who tells the story, and she is looking at these two young queer people who are artists who are going on this road trip, and she's sort of describing their road trip, but she's not involved in the action. She's not there in the car with them. So, how does she know what they're up to? How does she know how they feel? That is sort of left to the reader to interpret. So if it's magic, if it's stalking, if it's a sort of insightful leap, I like sort of leave that to you. But there is a couple of, the way that narrator appeared to me was kind of magical. Yeah. Where she did really, I'd been going along writing this novel in the third person, close to these two young characters, and it didn't feel like it was working. And I heard the writer, Rebecca Mackay, say that whenever she's had a problem writing a novel, she never solves the problem by writing around the problem. She solves the problem by putting the problem at the center of the novel. Whoa. And I was like, okay, sure, okay. And so I was like I was thinking how I could do that. I was not coming up with I wanted this book to feel bigger, to feel like it was acknowledging the generations of queer artists and ancestors who have come before. And then one day I was writing in the third person, and this like voice just sort of appeared like at my window, like knocking, and it was like fully formed. It was pretty much the verbatim first sentences of Housemates, which are where I live now, there is no art, etc. You know, that I was like, who is that? And you sort of have a choice in that moment where you can kind of close the door and say, I'm too far along, go away. You know, it would be easier to just shut her out. But I felt it was important, so I let her in, and I just tried to learn more and more about this narrator. And I think she is a little magical. I don't know myself exactly how she knows everything about what Bernie and Leah get up to, but I think that I will let it be unknown. Yeah.
I mean, I love so many things about this book, but that is one of my favorite things about it. I think it does exactly the kind of like expanding that you're talking about. It also feels like this kind of like radical act of empathy in a weird way. It's like she's imagining them because she's like connected with them enough to do it in this way that I think is kind of what like fiction is and does.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why I loved it. I think that is what books do. Like they put you inside heads that are not your own. And I think it's actually a miracle. And so it kind of feels like you built the miracle into your book in this very cool way.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the more I like wrote into it, the sense was that this narrator had her own reasons for watching and looking. She was trying to answer the question of like, sort of, what's the point of making art? Can art save your life? You know, is really the question that I think the narrator is asking. And so I just sort of let her keep asking that question. And with your book, though, I wondered, there's so many, it was not just one magical element. The garden, the title garden is magical, but there's this other sense of like, sort of gender magic as well, and community magic. Like the magic is made by these women sharing experiences and developing connections with each other that can sort of overcome this medical violence that's being done to them. Like it's not just the physical garden, it's the characters you built have magic in them too.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate that.
I don't think this is a spoiler.
No.
Because you just said you leave it up to the reader.
Yes. Go for it.
But there was definitely a moment where I thought the narrator and the narrator's partner were the future of Bernie and Leah.
Oh, the future.
Interesting.
I love that. There was a part of me that thought I was writing the literal historical figures into the book. Like that. There was a time when I thought the narrator was this large format photographer, Bernice Abbott, and I was like, is this a beyond the grave moment? Like, am I writing the Lovely Bones but gay? Like, I don't know. And then I was like, I don't think so. You know?
I saw that moment.
She sold a lot of copies.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I saw that moment in the book where I was like, oh, is this going to be okay?
I wasn't even looking for there to be a literal reason. I just, the way that the narrator's past relationship like echoes but is also different, or I guess Bernie and Leah are echoing hers, but they don't know. It just is like it lets her see her own life in this new light that I think is, and also see, I don't know, I feel like that's how she paid for the knowledge that she now has about them in this wonderful way. Like it made perfect fiction sense to me, and I was not looking for me to like learn at the end who she was. Yeah, I would have been bummed if you'd done that.
There's a couple of books that do this that I'm certainly not the first person to write a first-person narrator who's not involved in the action. Like if people have read Fleischman is in Trouble, which they made into a TV show, the narrator of that is like the friend who knows things about the main character that like is sort of impossible to know. Same with like Toni Morrison's jazz or a lot of Philip Roth's work and stuff. So I was just sort of, I did go on a deep dive about like how to do this narrator, but was yours always in Irene's point of view, or how did the point of view?
Speaking of like changes made at the last, so I sold this novel as a partial, which we've recently had, which means that like I had an existing editor and I wanted to work with her again. And so I'd written 100 pages and she bought the book based on those 100 pages. And this was kind of in the middle of the pandemic. And then I pulled this draft out of myself, like while my children, who were then like 7 and 3, were with me, like kind of all the time. And then they would go back to school, but then school would shut down again. Like it was just a very hard, like I kept telling my husband, it's like, I feel like I'm on maternity leave, but there's no newborn. Like it's just me and like my 3-year-old going like, please come play horses. And I'm like, I have to write a novel. And so I was so proud I'd finished this draft like on time. And so I sent it to my agent and editor, and they talked to each other before they talked to me, which is never a great sign. And the novel at that point was almost evenly divided. It was always in third, but it was almost evenly divided in perspective between Irene and Dr. Bishop, the female doctor. And so what they said to me, they were like, you've written a ghost story, and every time we're in the doctor's head, you're de-haunting it. You're like, we're seeing behind the curtain, and you're like taking all the air out of the balloon of this book. And so like whenever I get a note like that, I just like, I nod and smile and I write down what the person said and then I sleep on it, because like I think still that like good student in me like wants to just be told like you are a genius and it's brilliant and you don't have to change anything. Yeah. Like my deeper, better self like wants the book to be as good as it can be. And so I slept on it, and in the morning I felt excited about shedding the weight of those, because I had never been able to make Dr. Bishop's sections. Like my temptation was always to go way back in backstory to kind of like explain how she'd come to be doing what she was doing. And that's usually a sign that you're not really telling, not always, backstory can be wonderful and beautiful, but it's a sign that maybe they're not in charge of the main story sometimes. And so I just kind of felt like it felt so wonderful to think about what I could do with that space if I didn't have to, bring us through Dr. Bishop's whole life story. So it was not. It was in both of their heads. And then as soon as it was in Irene's head, it got weirder and stranger, and I gave her kind of like a psychic pipeline of access to Dr. Bishop's memories, some of them, or maybe inventions, who knows. It's a similar kind of thing.
I love that. And I love what you said about backstory, because I always struggle with that with my students, and I preach something to them, and then when I'm writing it myself, I'm like,
so hard.
I'm like, but just let me just go
like,
back.
But I
a
know
little
all
bit.
this. It would be so fun to tell you.
I know, but it's. I agree. Yeah. I think it's a sign often that the action isn't where the heat isn't where isn't in the right place. Like either you're started it too late, or you need to focus on what's going forward in time, not going back. We shouldn't
have to stop and learn all of this. If we do, 100%. Then maybe the story needs to be set there, or maybe we just don't need, like maybe I needed to know all this, but maybe the reader doesn't need to read it all.
Right, totally.
Yeah, that's a hard lesson though. It was a lot of pages, so many pages.
So I have 600 million more questions. However, you are all here, and we have Alex with another microphone. So if anyone would like to jump in with their own questions, just put your hand up and Alex will come to you.
Oh dear. I always feel like there should be a prize for the first question. Prize is our gratitude to you.
If you have a question, raise your hand. Okay.
I really appreciated you both mentioning about the magic in the book, and that was a great question. Now that y'all's books have been out for a little bit, I was wondering what type of interpretation magic have you seen from other people that you really appreciated and kind of like blown your mind maybe?
That's a great question. I will say, so I got a review that I feel like is like the review of my life, where basically someone like defended my right to be ambiguous. Like it was sort of like I feel like reviews have this, they have this format, right, where it's like nice thing, quibble, and then nice thing at the end.
Yeah.
And in place of the quibble, this writer, who also writes really weird things, was like, there will be people who will be frustrated that the loose ends are not tied up, and those people are wrong for X, Y, and Z reasons. And I was just like, I wept. I was just I felt so validated, because I think that sometimes your deeper, better, truest self doesn't doubt what you did. Like I know why I wrote things the way I wrote them, but like if you read the same frustration with lack of answers enough times, you start to think like maybe I'm just like my own private brain is just not like translating to people. And you know that. Most of you knows that that's not accurate, but like there are dark nights of the soul, and so I felt like it was this wonderful interpretation, like not really of my specific magic, but of like the role of magic, which is like I think to like expand the question and bring you farther down the road of living with the question, but not to solve the question,
I love that, to bring you further down the road with the question. Yes, I think the magic for me in the book coming out into the world is that a lot of people have said that reading the book makes them want to make art, make their
I
own
love
art.
that.
I know. Isn't that so nice?
It is how you feel when you read this book.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank
it's like-
you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Like one of the characters talks about like as she's lost the ability to make photographs because she feels this sort of sense of pollution. She's been polluted by this mentor who taught her how to make photographs, and he's creepy in various ways that you can read about. And that I shall not summarize here. And it's like, I think, yeah, I just felt that so, I think the process of releasing a book is its own creative act, and like it creates its own sort of momentum and like has its own logic, and that people said that like they want to go out and write or they want to go out and sculpt or make photographs, that fills me with great magic, because that means like my book has like pinged a little thing that pings something in them that makes potentially wild things that I'll never know about, and that's really cool. Yeah,
That is amazing.
But
that's
I think
like
that's
the
what
best
all
possible response
beautiful
to
books
any-
do. Like your
Yeah.
book, you know, like when fiction's working, like you said, I think it's that's what makes us want to go out and like participate in
Yes.
talking about it or whatever kind of creativity we do. Yeah.
Yes. No, and that feeling of like reading something you really loved is like kind of the whole reason to do this, and you can forget that, you know, in the
Yeah.
work of bringing a book out, and so that's the best that you're getting that response. You know, that's wonderful.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a quick question for Emma.
Yeah.
I have a stubborn pride in the area of land between Philadelphia and Pittsburgh
Yes.
that is pejoratively known as Pennsyltucky to
Yes.
some. It is not fictionalized very often. We're not talked about in books very often, and so it was very refreshing. So thank you for including Lancaster and Harrisburg
Yes.
in your book. And so I'm just kind of curious what that process was like. And did you get out in rural Pennsylvania here?
Yeah.
And yeah, what was that like?
Totally. Thank you for appreciating that. I feel somewhat of an imposter because I do live in Philly, but I have great curiosity and great love for, I think, sort of, I want to be what's it called? Beginner's mind. I have beginner's mind about Pennsylvania. I have a curiosity and an excitement to learn more, and I try to render what I know with openness to what I don't know. Yeah, I think my first book was set in Central Appalachia in West Virginia, and I have this like big interest and passion for talking about rural areas that are underseen, under-considered. There's a section in Housemates where they're talking about the ways that Pennsylvania is a divided state. It has two hearts, the character says. It's a state that I think is very... there's a sense that like that you're viewed pejoratively. It's your fault if certain politicians are elected. It's because you're voting against your own interests. It's because you're dumb, you're uninformed. All of these things like could not be further from the truth, as we know. And I think part of Bernie and Leah getting out of Philly and going on this road trip is looking for other kinds of truths, other kinds of knowledge. Like what are the kinds of truths that people who are living in these areas who are underseen can impart that city queers don't know, and the reverse. Like there's a sense that I'm interested in like sort of exchange between really urban areas and really rural areas, and I sort of try to like make a joke at the expense of the suburbs that like rural areas and urban areas are like both have a certain kind of magic and intensity, and it's that sort of middle place, like the suburbs. Sorry, it's like a toaster oven. It's like neither does it toast nor is it an oven. You know?
Yeah, no, that is true. Yes.
So I wanted to show the other side of the toaster oven, which is beautiful and complicated. And, Philly and Pennsylvania like decided the election pretty much. And we still really don't understand all the nuanced views that people hold in our state. It's not just Philly and Pittsburgh and the rest. It's every place is so different. And I wanted to just visually show that too. I tried to show Lancaster and its giant plaza smorgasbord. I tried to show the apple orchards that are between here and the Michaud State Forest. I just tried to show these visual things about the state that I think are really beautiful just because they exist and they deserve to be recorded. Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, thank you all for coming tonight. I actually came for Emma's book because it showed up on Book Talk a lot. And it seems like the queer book talkers have already decided it's the gay book of the summer.
That's
so
exciting.
that was really well. I'm not on horror book talk,
Uh-huh,
so I
yes.
don't know if
It's on
Claire's
there.
book
It's
has
seeded
been
into
there.
Book Talk for sure. Yeah.
But I was wondering, are you involved with TikTok and Book Talk in particular? I just went to visit my favorite book talker who owns City Books in Pittsburgh, Arlen, who's the most
Yeah.
amazing person in the world.
Yeah, Arlen is amazing. Yes.
And she even just put out an amazing summer reading program, which I thought is so unusual. An independent bookstore doing their own summer reading. So I was just interested because it's become an incredible thing for books and bookstores and writers. So are you involved, or do you watch people? Who do you watch, and has it helped you?
Oh my God, I love this question. And maybe I'd be curious to hear it from you too, Claire, like how you reach readers or like how you think about like accessibility for literary books. But thank you so much for seeing me on the Book Talk. I think that there is a lot of like sort of, again, like looking down at Book Talk in the literary community. People, I mean, I'm 37, so I'm an older millennial at this point. It's the only technology, or the only like social app that I did not come of age alongside. I have actually like learned TikTok as a non-native speaker of it, you know, because I think it has an incredible power to make books accessible to people from all backgrounds. So I think that's really cool. And that is sort of built into Housemates, is that both of the characters are really interested in how do you make sort of high art accessible to the most possible human beings. So when I saw, you know, the news that Book Talk was really selling books, like that was a place where readers are really excited to hang out and to connect with literary books that might not get, you know, in the hands of young people or people that don't usually care about like the New York Times book review or bestsellers, whatever. I was like, all right, let's check this out and see. And at first it was hard. Like it's hard to kind of wade through seeing the same like 5 romantasy books over and over again. But then you do find your sort of people and your niche. You know, and there's been like 3 reviewers who like have really changed the life of this book. Like I don't think I would have sold much without them and their support. And many of them are younger, probably in their 20s or mid-20s, who are aspiring writers themselves. So I think about it as sort of like a generational gift in a way. Like they're lifting up my book to connect it to younger readers, and I'm happy to sort of pay that forward by mentoring them as professional authors, whatever it may be. We've sort of exchanged information in that way. So I think it's a really powerful tool that the publishing industry doesn't really understand. And I've definitely had to lead my publisher to TikTok and be like, it's important, let's put some effort behind that. I have seen Claire's book on it. I think horror is a really like vibrant place where it's a place where people are like asking questions that are not usually socially acceptable. But yeah, how do you find readers too?
Yeah, I mean, so I wish I understood TikTok better. I'm 41, and I feel like, and I think also, I live in such mortal terror of losing momentum as a writer, like in my writing, just because I think it's because my whole career has happened as a parent of very small children who are now like getting a little bigger. So maybe I should invest some time in learning TikTok. But it's just like, I feel like I've had to fight so hard to find the time to even write the novels. I mean, we all do, I think, in different ways. But I think it has felt like, it feels daunting and scary to me to learn how to do it in a way that I like haven't been able to make mental or actual like physical time space for. And I do, but I think that everything you're saying about reaching people with art is so important. And the way that, I don't know, I mean, I think part of it, I've never been a great social media person. I think partially because I love revising so much that I'm just like, I'm not able to be breezy. Like I'm just not good at it off the cuff. Like, so I have the most anodyne presence on all of the social media platforms possible, where I'm just like, I loved this book and here's why, you know? But
You're also a teacher though.
I am, and that's what I was going to say, is like, I think that the ways that I don't think of that really as finding my readers, though. I think of it as like, I don't know. I think of it as like what I do because I love art and because I need to make a living. But I think that it is, there's a way in which I don't think my life would feel full and complete if I weren't teaching, because I think that is where I find that sense of connecting with other people who love what I love. I mean, it's sort of a much smaller way of doing that, probably. But I do think that you're right, that publishers just don't get what's going on over there on TikTok.
It's true though that it's kind of the same thing. It's like TikTok is a way to nerd out about a very specific thing that you might not know people in real life who want to nerd out with you about that. And I think getting in a creative writing classroom and studying a text has a similar kind of effect. Again, I just think that's so interesting that people often oppose like academia and TikTok as if they could never be, on the same plane or have the same impulse. But I think they do have a lot of the same impulse. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's very dumb. And none of my like TikTok knowledge is because I think it's like beneath me. I feel like I will mess it up and not understand.
Me too. Yeah.
So.
Other questions? Anyone? I have one more question. Emma, we met at a reception. This was just maybe a month ago. And in your talk, you talked about depiction of fatness in novels, and it was a really moving moment for me as a reader who hadn't heard that before and previously hadn't scrutinized like everything I'm reading and that whole situation. And I know, I think you wrote an article about it, and so it was really moving for me. And so I don't know if we've touched base on it yet, but would you mind just talking a little bit about that and how it fits into your novel?
For sure. And like embodied, I think that's another thing that like binds our novels together is that like both Claire and my books have an intense investment in embodiment.
And that's what I'm always telling my students too, is like it doesn't live if you're not putting the reader inside the body of the character.
No, that's so true. Okay, I want to hear thoughts too. But yes, so there's two characters who are main characters, Bernie and Leah. Leah is a fat person. I am a fat person. There's so few books about fat people that treat fat people with respect, that treat people's bodies as neutral, that just describe them as bodies that are living and moving in the world as opposed to in some kind of positive or negative connotation. So I ran some numbers because I'm a Virgo moon, and I saw that especially in fiction I'm talking about, so the New York Times notable list, they pick these probably 40 or 50 fiction titles every year as notable, and I did the math, and it was like less than 1% of the New York Times notable fiction in the past 5 years have even had a fat character in them. Less than 1%.
God.
And more than half of America is fat, considered overweight or obese. And I just find that so wild. Like, it's like, what other ways do we have of like sort of ignoring like more than half the population of America? It's so wild. So I was just like, I'm thinking about this character. Who is she? What is she made of? What's important to her? And I felt she was wrestling with her body. She was wrestling with embodiment. And so there's sort of, a big part of Leah's development over the novel is thinking about like how to be a person living in a fat body who, is curious about your own body and isn't totally ashamed, but also by the end of the book, Leah doesn't have like some huge revelation. She isn't like, and now I'm done and I'm cured and I'll never diet again. It's like she's really getting to that place, I think, where she's just more comfortable grappling and grappling out loud. And the relationship of the two characters evolves over the course of the book so that Leah gets to be desired. She's considered beautiful and desirable by Bernie, and I wanted to give that to her. It's such a violent landscape in contemporary American fiction that whenever you have a fat character, it's usually played for laughs or repulsion, and I just feel that that's so harmful. That's not what I want to do my characters. Yeah. But how did you think about rendering like the pregnant body or in some ways are fat too? There's weight involved.
Right. And there's a lot of like similar, almost in the opposite, like various characters whose pregnancies are not going well or like concerned about their size not growing enough. Like I think there's a feeling of like, how do I live in this physical form that my brain can't just shape the way it wants it to be? Yeah. Right. And I think that's what my characters are dealing with over the course of the novel, is that like they're there because their bodies have failed at this one job that they're supposed to be able to do in this time and place. And they all have these husbands who've come home from World War II wanting lots and lots of babies very quickly. And I think in the case of Irene, who is like a really difficult, prickly person, even though I love her dearly at the beginning of the book, her one softness is like she just really loves her husband. And she has built her whole life around this idea that he is a much better person than she is. And he came home from the war like really messed up and needing this one thing from her, and she can't give it to him. Like she's just trying and trying and can't make it happen. And so I think like I wanted the physically embodied experience of that failure to kind of haunt the book in certain ways. And I think also like because it is a ghost story, this novel, it's also like it's a mingled inner and outer haunting at the same time. And so the inner pieces of it were really important. And so I think a lot about like, I think it's one of the most fun challenges in fiction is like, how do I make this feeling or mood or gesture or expression new again? Because it's so hard, like and you're so good at it. Like when you meet a character, you're wonderful at giving us this like very particular gesture or like physical attribute that's not like, I'm always telling my students, like, we don't want paper doll descriptions of people. We don't want, like, I looked in the, yes, I looked in the mirror and I like adjusted my brown hair. Like, that's not what those don't give you anybody. Like, but I think what you're looking for is like that detail that could only belong to this person. I mean, I think about Leah's hair and how it like flips out and then like and there's that one like, I don't know, there's a moment where she's like holding her head and it's like her beautiful brain is like in the space of her two hands. I don't know. There's just like, I think you're always looking for those details that are like a thing you've seen, but you haven't seen it in that way. And the words give it to you. And I do think like, again, I'm not a writer who knows what I'm trying to say before I start, but I do think part of what I wanted to do in my novel was to kind of like insist on the physical reality of pregnancy, because I think that there's still a lot of like willful misunderstanding about what that does and doesn't involve, sometimes by the people who are making our laws. So I just, again, I don't start from like a top-down, direction in fiction. I'm very much like a trees person, and then I have to kind of like arrive at the forest. But I think that was like ultimately at the end, I'm like, oh, I think I really wanted the reader to have to live through this too.
And I feel like what's so fascinating, like the thing that really struck me most about your book was this idea that like, I hope this isn't spoiling anything, but like the doctors are trying to convince the women that it's their minds that are preventing them from being pregnant. Yeah. Like, isn't that wild?
Yes.
Like, and that's not that far off from
it's not that
the
far
truth,
off.
And so your book is really interested in this connection, like between the mind and the body. Is this real? Is it fake? Is it gaslighting?
Yes, exactly.
Like, I find that really fascinating. And I also like, Bernie and Leah are always sort of joking, like it's become very like woo woo and like sort of the moment to be like, trust the body. And it's like, why? But I think they both do sort of learn more by the end of the book about their own bodies. And I think your characters also do.
Well, and
maybe?
I think that exactly what you said is still very much there. It's just a little bit more subtextual now. Like in both of my pregnancies, so everything worked out fine in the end. But in each case, there was like a little thing that they could see on a test or a scan that no one could tell me what it meant. And I had this doctor, a male doctor, and he was like, don't worry, nature knows what it's doing. And I did not, and it was very much like, the tone was very much like, don't get too stressed out. Like you just sit back and just stay calm. You stay nice and calm. And I'm not someone for whom that makes me calmer. So what that did was it drove me to the internet to like Google what I could find out about this little thing. And what I could find were basically anecdotes on both sides saying that this had been a terrible catastrophe or that it had been totally fine. It was just like a normal fingerprint of being human. That was just like a weird little artifact. And so I think that very much there in the tone of how people talked to me when I was pregnant was like, you wouldn't want to get stressed out. Like let's control your mind so that your baby can, and so that it puts this weird burden on you. Yeah, I think. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Sense of like,
Yeah.
That is one of the major mysteries of life, is the connection between the mind and the body. For me, anyway, like, to be a person is to grapple with that question of, how are they connected? Are they separate? Like, am I just a brain walking around on sticks? Is my body the complete ruler and my brain has nothing? Like, that is like one of the great mysteries of being a person. And I feel like that's,
that's
what
where
I got
your
from
fiction
your book.
is going. Yeah, well, and a second seed, like in addition to the DES stuff, the second seed for this book was my childhood love, deep, deep love of The Secret Garden, the novel, which I do still truly, truly love, but I reread it once I realized I wanted this walled garden. And it is a creepy book in ways that I didn't really process as a kid. It also has terrible racism. But there's a lot of like Christian science-y, like think healthy and you'll be healthy. Like the main character, Mary, is like, she's a horrible person at the beginning of the book and she looks terrible. Like she's all like pinched and like, she's just like, and then as she reforms her spirit and like spends time in the good, healthy air, she like becomes much more attractive to look at, according to the book, sort of. It's a fascinating thing. And there's a whole child who like relearns how to walk by like willing himself into health. It's like a very victim blamey. I mean, I don't think that's the spin she's putting on it. She's sort of like a let's not do the rest cure to everybody. But it's like, when you look at that from the other side of the coin, it's very much like you must not have controlled your mind very well if you're having this bodily problem, you know, which I think is fascinating. And in the context of pregnancy, like very, very fraught and still there in the messaging. Maybe in the subliminal messaging of all of our lives. I don't know.
We've got to wrap up. Can we give one more round of applause?